guess my view is that we would carry on in the vein we are and maintain a leadership position in this and be the significant funder of it, and if others can come on board, that's great, that's a benefit. In terms of milestones, the next steps that we're working on at the moment, and I was hoping to bring you back an update ENS in May, but unfortunately Keiko's on a training course, so we might look at how we deal with that, is the development of an implementation plan. So now we've got the strategy, what are we going to do, how are we going to deliver it, who are we working with, what are the steps to take. The other milestone, so there's three. The second one would be the establishment of the Biodiversity Forum. So all of those people who have an interest in biodiversity in the region, getting them together in a regular forum, motivational speakers, discussions, etc., etc. And the third milestone is the establishment of the trust, Biodiversity Trust, whatever it's going to be called, to set about generating or bringing in significant revenue streams to the region to start spending on biodiversity projects, potentially, or hope not potentially, ideally lined up with the implementation plan. So those are the kind of three key things.
Councillor Pipe and myself served on the, whatever it was called, the task force committee that put the strategy together. Are our services no longer required between now and the end of the term?
So that was something we were going to bring to the discussion at the Environment Services Committee, is what's the future of the steering group and the core working group, the two groups that we had operating to develop the strategy. We had put in the strategy that once it was signed up or launched, that we would develop the implementation plan in partnership with the supporting and accountable partners who signed that document, of which there are a range, and so we are setting about a process to do that. The question, I guess, remains as to what's the role. Well, clearly the council has a role in that discussion. Certainly there's a lot of operational detail that will go into that, particularly in the work that Mike's PEST team do, and certainly that this role will do. But what's the role for governance in that? That's not clear at this stage.
So we're getting towards the end there, unless Councillor Belford, you've got another one there, you're all pretty good. Just trying to test the mood of my colleagues. It seems there is a desire to have a short session with the lawyer, so on that basis I suggest we leave this on the table and see what he has to offer later in the day, not too late. Okay. So we'll come back to this item at the end. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let's go back to the paper. We are now down to the late items, which are item 20, recommendations for Regional Planning Committee. And if I hand that over to Mr. Palmer, have you got anything to lead us into the Regional Planning Committee recommendations? So we deal with them first. If there's any specific questions around the master plan, well, now's the time to have them. But in the meantime, looking at all the recommendations, do you have any comments or any anything to add, either Mr. Palmer or Mr. Maxwell?
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I really just want to note the volume of recommendations and material that was provided to this meeting of the Regional Planning Committee. We had a session with the Tangata Whenua representatives that was well attended the day before, and that was a 4-hour workshop. We didn't get through half of the items that we had put on that agenda, which I think reflects the level of engagement and intensity of dialogue that we had. So overall, I thought it was a great meeting, given the level of engagement and interest in the issues before the Regional Planning Committee, and I was pleased that we were able to get through all the material and all the recommendations. And I think the level of preparatory work that had been done by members of the committee in terms of reading, what have you, enabled us to move through it all. So We have another tank group meeting coming up at the end of May, and so planning's well underway for that. And the decisions of the Regional Planning Committee recommended to Council today have put us on a firm footing, I think, now for moving the whole tank project forward in particular. So it was a particularly helpful meeting, and the recommendations that lie before you today are pretty much essential for us getting this body of work, this large body of work, back on track.
Right, any questions? Someone happy to move then? Happy to move? We accept the recommendations there. We have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Graham. Wish to speak, mover?
No, I think the reports are very thorough, and it's very helpful to actually have had those reattached again, so we know where we are, but this is a good record.
Seconder. No further comments?
Yes.
Mr. Mohi.
Yeah, just to thank James and staff for that meetings that are going on. It just enables them to not to feel whakamara about silly questions, and they just feel as if they're it's an opener into the main meeting. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Well, I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. The contrary, no. Carried. And the equally weighty report at the end of that paper from the chairman. As you can see, the majority of the month was focused on the trip to China, and I'd actually like to encourage a bit of discussion around our relationship today. You'll see there that a fair chunk of that was bullet pointed and may need further explanation. There was a lot was packed into a very tight 3 days, and there was a couple of things I left out of here. For example, we went and looked at a solar farm, which was nice, but was pretty hard to get the significance of it. And I think Mr. Adey tried very hard to. I thought we were going to a factory of some sort, but and I can commend Mike for trying really hard, but somehow that got lost in translation, I think. Yeah, but perhaps before I start giving you my views, I'd ask others who were on the trip if they had any thoughts. And I've had one correction already about how the arrangement started in the first place, and it appears I may have that wrong. So I might ask Councillor Scott to give us a
And I think it's helpful for
a history
the
lesson
discussion too, Mr. Chairman, that the record is straight on that. I was part of a Napier City visit there 11 years ago, and that was just me going as a fully paying accompanying passenger on the trip. But that was when we visited Suzhou as a friendship, and the potential there was discussed as to the better fit of Suzhou than Langwangang, which was Napier's official sister city. At that time, Suzhou was, and that was because the government directed, thou shalt go forth and sign up every bit of the world as a sister city. And Suzhou did not have a sister city and was looking in New Zealand for one. But Napier City couldn't have two wives, as it was described. The reason the Regional Council picked it up and why we actually returned and signed that agreement 10 years ago was that there was a real focus on increasing agricultural expertise, and it was felt that we had access to that type of expertise and made it a good fit. There were also the business opportunities, and dare I say it was partly driven by the ginkgo, that there was more opportunity for trade there, and it would give existing, not just Napier City, but of course the growers were throughout Hawke's Bay, so give them some increased access to the markets that were envisaged through that. So it was really on the back of that more primary production relationship, etc. I think it's only fair to state that when we signed as a council with them 10 years ago, that the offer was then made to tour the Warriors. So that never came from Napier City. It was an offer from our sister city, and it was to us. And I think on this trip they made it quite clear they no longer have a friendship agreement with Napier. They only, again, have one wife, and that is their relationship is through us. And I think should there be any future opportunity to tour any part of their exhibition here, while it falls on Napier City to provide through the MTG, it is a regional facility, although we recognise where the main operating funding comes from. And I think we need to work cooperatively in the future to make the best out of that. And I hope that when we get our tour of their cultural group later this year, that we are working, wider than just us in bringing those benefits to the city. So,
Stand corrected. It was my understanding was because Napier City already had an existing arrangement. That's sort of how we got involved. But that does make more sense. So thank you for that update. Councillor Hewitt, have you got any thoughts on the trip? And then I'll try and lead us into perhaps a more broader discussion about the future, etc. I know there's varying views.
So we're taking your report as read, and what I can add to that is that it was quite an endurance trip, this one, and I'd really like to thank Mike for stepping up, because everything that could go wrong did, and you really bore the brunt of it in terms of resorting just about every one of our air flights. It was a long way around, and really to acknowledge the time that Mike put into that. And as I say, we ended up 24 hours late out of the country, and then 24 hours late back in, and many hours in between, and delays at airports. Our sister city relationship with Suzhou, as I understand it, we're one of 17 sister cities that they now have, and so I'm not too hung up on the one wife sort of thing, because there's lots of brothers and sisters, and I wonder if there aren't financial impacts. Whether we widen our target as to where we want to end up in terms of sister city relationships without feeling we're compromising in existing relationships. If I look at the opportunities and some observations that I've made on top of here, there is a very clear opportunity for cultural enhancement two ways with this project. And one of the things we had looked at was the Han Dynasty, and there was a dance company that we did a performance for us. They're coming out to New Zealand in August of this year. So in terms of appreciating the Han Dynasty and what's taken place over the history and that two-way relationship, I do see benefits for people in both countries there. Tourism, I see huge benefits in tourism, and we really did turn it on for in our tourism visits. We went to an area. I get a little bit muddled up in the names of the different areas, but where we were, it's a new tourism development, and he had finished us with some T-shirts, visitors from Hawke's Bay, and there were a lot of gifts and exchanging. They pulled in some of the key tourism operators for us to be discussing, and I'd like to acknowledge the work that Christine, Councillor Scott, put in there, because she had linked up with Annie and taken a lot of brochures, and that was pretty smart. We probably all should have had that prior preparation. I think they really enjoyed that. One of the key observations for me was that we had T-shirts, visitor from Hawke's Bay, and it had one of those QR codes that immediately linked through to Facebook, which didn't offer any value in China because they can't get onto Facebook. So I'd advise in future there's a link to a website. Immediately once we got these T-shirts out, I had the key photographer come and scan his cell phone to try and get onto that. So that's probably a key learning. There was a lot of interest in education for us. One of my observations was that when we speak about EIT, it's very meaningless to the Chinese. EIT is not a good word for branding or telling a story about an institute in Hawke's Bay. So, yeah, it was meaningless to our customer at the end of the day. There seemed to me to be real trend to be sending these little emperors, because they're very much a single child society, on the most amazing opportunity that they can in every step of their life. And what we were being approached for was the opportunity to be sending kids from the ages of 5 to 9 out to New Zealand on cultural exchanges. Well, that's a very big undertaking for the host, and I know they'll be well supported, but I don't really think they're our target market at that age group, other than the fact that the parents are trying to offer their single child this most wonderful opportunity. In terms of environmental, we viewed a lot of environmental enhancement projects, and they were of huge interest in that. We're cleaning up our environment, they're telling us. It was a coal mining area, but when I was breathing, I could still taste and smell the coal. And we did observe lots and lots and lots of trucks with carefully covered loads that definitely had a lot of coal in it. So when I questioned our interpreter, who was with us the whole time, she wasn't so much an interpreter, she was absolutely fluent in English to the extent that she could joke with us. So she was a fantastic girl. And she said to me, with the coal, who they'd told us no more coal, well, just a little bit. So I'm sure we were a captive audience, and if we hadn't observed that, we may have believed it hook, line and sinker. But the open cast coal minings that we saw, a couple of them had been turned into quite large lakes, and the fish in the lakes were our lunch, which kind of put you off eating it maybe. But I think that in terms of what we can offer our sister city for learnings and environmental opportunities here in New Zealand are absolutely tremendous, and can be translated back into their environment with huge benefit, because I think that the willingness is there on their behalf to improve, and so I acknowledge that. In terms of economic development, my observation was that this is a third-tier area that we were visiting, and although we were being presented with opportunities, and it was hoped that we may be encouraging economic activity to be going into that area, I personally wouldn't be recommending it based on what I saw. That's my own individual observation, and others may wish to add to it. But overall, I think it leads to some really big questions. Out of the 17 sister city relationships, Suzhou is only paying to host 3 of us. So they do value the Hawke's Bay connection, and they did host us very beautifully. And I acknowledge that. So in terms of going forward, it's not a relationship after 10 years that we should be throwing away, but probably fine-tuning our expectations. And if it's cultural and tourism and environmental that we're targeting, then be aware of that. But perhaps the economic is down the line. So it's a decision that we need to make. Do we pursue that relationship? I'm not sure what the cost is. I know they come out here pretty regularly, don't they, Mike? And we do host them in return, so there is a cost in return. But that's a discussion for the whole council. So I was pleased that we took the opportunity up, and it certainly was an eye opener. It was a long way round. Yeah.
To add to that, Mr. Chairman, the total change in expectation from Sister City that has occurred with Suzhou over the 10 years. 10 years ago, as I said, the central government of China had directed thou shalt be friendly right throughout the world, go and sign up. And that was the aim of theirs, was to sign with as many different countries for just the contact and possibly cultural exchanges. It was made very plain to us this time that the government is now demanding outcomes, and those outcomes are in terms of economic development. Consequently, we had lined up for us actual people who were importers and exporters who were looking for opportunity. With all of those visits, the tourism the same, it was, we're going to get runs on the board. And they made it quite plain to us their budgets are now tied to it, hence the reason why they're now only fully funding 3, and that's Austria, Australia and ourselves, where they actually can achieve those different areas of growth. And it's very pleasing to see that we are one of those. And for the first time, rather than just this is a show welcome banquet, it was actual working meetings on each case saying, right, well, this is what we're looking for. where can you work in with us? I think that's a huge shift in emphasis, and to me, it is actually what we're expecting out of it too. We want runs on the board, they want runs on the board. It's time these sister city relationships actually work to bring some advantage to our region, as well as they're achieving some of their targets. So I think it's a very positive shift.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan, do you have any thoughts? I mean, I'm not sure where we go with this, but and I'm not sure whether we can deal with it today.
I was a,
Oh, Mike, I wasn't game to ask Mike what he got up to.
Yeah, I forgot all about Madam Gong. She's an extremely good drinker. Reinforce Debbie's remarks regarding Mike 80. You know, if it hadn't been for him, we would be still in the airport in Hong Kong waiting. Just in terms of the education thing, I went over there 4 years ago and there was a half a dozen of the Hukarere secondary school girls went. Now, what I'm going to do is ask the treaty groups if they could host 3 or 4 girls from each of the 4 immediate treaty groups around Heretaunga to send over there. They would be very, I believe those, and I've talked to some of the Hukarere girls in the ensuing years since they've been back, it's something they'll never forget and they'll carry for their whole lives. And I think the treaty groups would be very sensible to spend $20,000 to $30,000 by getting 3 or 4 of their girls over there. When they get there, I've been promised that they will be looked after, hosted as much as we were. There's 34,000 odd tourists going out of Yuzhou City a year, and I think that's a good avenue for Hawke's Bay tourism to sort of focus on those sister cities, Napier, Hastings, and ourselves, you know, because it's such a huge market that they could just spread the advertising so thinly that you wouldn't even know. So just in terms of the coal, I just caught part of the news thing there, half in Chinese and half in English. And I wasn't quite sure of which way the coal was going, but there was 100 million tonnes of coal going one way or the other from North Korea. So coal is still quite important to China.
yeah, sorry, I was a bit of a cynic about this at the outset, and I haven't heard an awful lot from what we've just heard to change my mind about that. It seems that there are 2 opportunities here. One is in the cultural exchange area, and it seems that there may be some things that can happen there, but the other is whether we can develop business relationships which can further the people that we sit around this table representing. And I have no idea whether there were any business people on this trip or how we might be able to move that forward. All I know is that there are about 4 people sitting around this table. Who else went on this trip?
Two council staff members, and that was it. So the chamber, I'm not entirely sure what the reason is, and we haven't had a debrief with them yet, but we will. Didn't show up with anyone in the end. So.
Yeah, so I mean that's a hole in the entire program from my perspective that needs to be addressed.
It is,
to make the sister city relationship worthwhile.
It is, but the relationship with the chamber was incredibly strong over there, and I think the opportunity is connecting. We had a whole range of their business people sitting in this huge room, and as I say in the report, they're very discerning in what they wanted out of something. For example, we talked about Hawke's Bay wine, and 5 years ago everyone had said, oh, we want Hawke's Bay wine, whereas now they say, well, tell us why we should have Hawke's Bay wine. It was not, it was a more like an engaged conversation. Now, other than drinking the odd little bit of it, I'm not an expert on Hawke's Bay wine, but I know someone who is, and that's a connection that we can make out of this. I sort of temper the whole thing with what the Prime Minister's just completed and done with a 40-strong troop of all sorts of people, and listening to the special trade, agricultural trade envoy, I think he calls himself, Mike Pedersen, on the radio yesterday. That was very positive and a huge shift, but there was no, other than the Alibaba deal, there seem to be no tangible signatures on huge trade deals or whatever. A work in progress, sure, but these things take time. And I guess our challenge as a council is where to from here. I mean, we've got a 10-year relationship which, according to NZTE, is actually, that's reasonably important. The political arrangement is incredibly important, but where to from here? What do we need to be more discerning about what we get out of it? We don't go. I mean, the cost to this council really is hosting them for 5 years, not the 1 year in 5 that we go that direction, because they pay a big chunk of that. So.
Yeah, but you talk about the Prime Minister's visit there with the delegations. They were going to first-tier cities, and I've just heard this described as a third-tier city. So, I mean, are we even in this at the right level?
Can I answer that? Just the just for a moment, Councillor. There's, in terms of, we hear about the 6% that they've dropped down to. There's actually several levels. The tier 1, the Shanghais of the world, probably at 15 to 20%, and these so-called small cities of 2 million, provincial, there's a huge difference in the so-called percentage of growth. But Ngahiwi was actually over there when we were there. He's actually just come back from being there again, and he emphasises, and I just never really realised until speaking to him how important the Chinese regard the personal relationships. And, I know he gets a bit of flack from the other Maoris around town, and I'll certainly be backing him up. What he's got in relationships is something that I know the fruit people, the wine people are actually developing themselves. There's no doubt about it. They're the ones that will develop that personal relationship.
I'd just like to comment that personal relationship thing's called guanxi, and guanxi to Chinese is hugely important. And the Prime Minister's trip, just to clarify that, they did have a lot of commercial people on board on that plane. I mean, they had the scales people for a start, but nevertheless, all these little things, and I said so at the beginning, they all add to the guanxi, and that the fact that New Zealand is high up there still, and one of the 3, you tell me, and I thought we're sort of top of the list, really. And the Prime Minister's getting that. He's getting, really good contact right deep into the powers of China. And all these little things, they all add to it. Doesn't matter whether it's first tier, second tier, third tier. They all add to it. And it epitomised by the fact that so much of our business is now going into China. And our piprit industry, I don't know what percentage it is, but it's huge. Our wine industry is, they're insatiable for it, despite what you say here. Yeah, but practically all of our major wineries could sell all their production in China if they wanted to. But of course, it's a big risk. They wouldn't want to. So I do support these things. Perhaps you might take a couple of commercial people, but even if you don't, I think they're all important. And they add to it. I just want to make, Tourism New Zealand is on Weibo account. Sorry I didn't mention that, but you could have had the Weibo account on your T-shirt. Rather, is linked to do have a Weibo account, which is their equivalent. It's actually bigger than.
It would have been good to know.
Yeah, it would have been good to know. So you could have had your Weibo account on, but never mind. You always miss a few things.
So maybe we wrap this up. I'm just thinking after. Sure.
One was that we did have a meeting with NZTE while we were over there, and they took on board everything that we, what follow-ups they could do, but also made suggestions to us which we're bringing back to a later meeting with the Chamber of Commerce and Business Hawke's Bay. The other thing is that of the products that they were interested in, it was wine, beef and lamb. They actually were not interested in apples or milk, which was rather surprising, but that was the focus of their new shopping centre, that they said these are the products we're directly looking to put. The other thing was investment in Hawke's Bay, and we raised the opportunity of investments such as the new hotel. There was definite interest in that.
So can I suggest then, and there's others that haven't spoken, but to move this along, once we have our final wrap-up, well, hopefully not final, maybe it's the beginning of something new, but with the Chamber to discuss this, and I know Mr. Adey's still trying to get the powers to be together, maybe a subsequent paper to CNS, just sort of quantifying, putting a bit more meat on these bones and quantifying where to from here. The other thing I'd add is, Mayor Yule's just come back from China. They've just signed a 35-year relationship. I really need to get alongside him after this recent visit and just try and get more of a flavour about what the region could be doing going forward. I know... well, Nahiwi...
Just what Mike says, Nahiwi is really important up there now, and he has a really unique ability on making this sort of thing work, and he's making it work.
And he's a magnet for Paki boys because they walked into each other on the bund and amongst
the fish deals that
100,000
they've
people.
done. I mean, he goes up there and then he sends Tana in behind, and they're doing deals.
Yeah.
They're doing serious deals
Yeah.
with the Chinese, and it's about the Guanxi, the Chinese that they're dealing with. Trust them.
We did teach the new mayor of Suzhou how to hongi too, which went down very well with his group. There was cameras flying in all directions, I can tell you.
Not him though, all the others.
He looked a bit startled when I first did it. But
Can I just make a brief comment? I support the notion of sister city relationships, and we should keep this going on a relatively low key but focused basis. And it's worth remembering things like trade follows the flag, and the relationships are door openers for business, and we actually have a good high repute with China. New Zealand was, I think, one of the first Western nations to recognise the People's Republic back in the 1950s, and internationally we treat a fairly careful stance and don't slavishly follow the American foreign affairs agenda. So they like to be friendly with us, and we should like to be friendly with them because of the vast potential in both trade and cultural relationships.
thank you. Okay, well let's the rest of the report's pretty straightforward. The signing of Te Tera Whakaemi o Te Wairau. I hope to attend that next month. That's huge for the Wairau district, and they've had their little hiccups here and there, but they've made very good progress. So I hope to be able to report back on that next month. Other than that, relationship visit to Gisborne, a couple of meetings, nothing further to add really. Happy to move the report. You happy to move? Thank you. You happy to second? Further discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Let's break for lunch. Spot on, yeah, but that's my Puckerau time. That's Hastings time over there. It's a few minutes ahead. That's about. Look, we're waiting on people to arrive for HBRC. It's got 1:30 in the paper. I've just had a text. It might be more like 20 past, but let's break for a lunch and just for members of the public.
20 to 2, because the time it gets in the airport. And
Into here, but they can start surely. Yeah. So 1:30, say, just so members of the public understand what's happening, and we'll see you all back here then. So spend some money and build Alton's Town if you finish your lunch early. There you go.